Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Adverse action rules for federal employees are undergoing a major transformation. A set of final rules from the Office of Personnel Management transfers more power to OPM and takes some authority away from the Merit Systems Protection Board. At the same time, agencies will now be required to prioritize employee performance over tenure during a reduction in force. Here with more, Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, welcome.
Eric, nice to be with you.
Likewise. So, 3 final rules from OPM that are making changes to the employee appeal process. From a practical perspective, what will this look like for employees that are trying to make those appeals?
This is going to be a major change, Eric, for federal employees when they are dealing with an adverse action from their agency. So that can include a removal, a suspension, a demotion. And the 3 rules that OPM finalized in particular talk about adverse actions that are taken during either a reduction in force, or RIF for short, while employees are serving on a probationary period. And then also if there's some sort of discipline or removal action due to a suitability reason or suitability standards for government. So going forward, what this means for federal employees practically is that they will have to appeal their case to OPM if they believe that their agency wrongly acted against them. That's instead of where that authority has been at the Merit Systems Protection Board independently for many decades. So going forward, OPM is going to handle all of those appeals cases rather than MSPB. So that is a very significant shift here for federal employees.
All right, so we have the what. Let's talk about the why. Why does OPM say that it is making these changes?
Their goal and what they stated in the final rule is that this is meant to make the process faster, more consistent, and cost less. They pointed to what they say they believe is limited capacity at the MSPB to handle various employee appeals cases. Over the years, that's led in some cases to backlogs and delays in issuing decisions, sometimes for months or even years for those employees. So OPM says it believes it internally can do a better job making that process efficient and making it fairer to employees. OPM Director Scott Cooper emphasized that the changes are not meant to erode the independence of that appeals process, even though that's been a very strong critique of what a lot of people have said and some concerns that have been raised about how this is going to change things for federal employees.
Yeah, let's talk about those critiques, because I'm sure there were plenty. What has been the reaction overall from the federal community when this announcement was made?
There's been a very negative reaction in the federal community to this, and this wasn't really a surprise to have these final rules because we saw these proposals months ago from the Trump administration and from OPM. But what we saw in the final rule, interestingly, is that actually in the one that talks about changing the appeals process during RIFs or reductions in force, 99% of public comments opposed OPM's plan to change the authority from MSPB to OPM itself. Critics raised concerns that moving all of the appeals processes to OPM is going to mean that federal employees don't get a fair, independent, or complete process if they're challenging their agency. In addition to moving the process to OPM, they're also removing the guarantee of a hearing in a lot of cases. So there's going to be fewer steps, which OPM says will make things more efficient, or that's the goal. But there's been a lot of concerns that this is going to mean that federal employees don't really have a fair chance to challenge their agencies. There's also concerns that OPM does not have the capacity itself to handle employee appeals. This is especially considering that OPM lost more than a third of its overall staffing in the last year, and that the OPM office that it's designating to take on this work has not historically dealt with these types of cases. I spoke with Jenny Mattingly, who's Vice President of Public Policy and Stakeholder Engagement at the Partnership for Public Service, about what the concerns that she's seeing with this.
But I do think it requires staff, and MSPB has an entire roster of administrative judges. It's got a board that oversees it. It's got a lot of support staff. And granted, these are only a portion of what MSPB does, but depending on if we see massive staff reductions or turnovers like we did in the past year, that could be a lot of cases that come through. And I think it would require a lot of resources for OPM to offer the same quality and independent services.
That's Jenny Mattingly from the Partnership for Public Service. We're speaking here with Federal News Network reporter Drew Friedman. And Drew, OPM has also issued a fourth final rule changing the priority order during RIFs. What will this mean for federal employees, other than it's not going to be as big of a factor of how long you've been there?
That's right. And again, this one is not necessarily a surprise because this is something that the Trump administration proposed many months ago. It's also something they attempted to change in the first Trump administration. So what this is going to mean for federal employees is when an agency does conduct a reduction in force going forward, that agencies will be required to first consider employees' performance and how well they're doing in their jobs based on their annual performance reviews. Then they'll be considering veterans' preference, and then the tenure and seniority of federal employees will only be used as tiebreakers. And this happens when agencies are deciding whether to retain employees in which positions, whether to demote them to different positions, or whether to remove them entirely during a RIF. So this is really changing that whole process on its head, where seniority and tenure were considered first, and then performance was the last consideration. Now this is completely the reverse order of that going forward. And again, this doesn't affect any RIFs that took place last year at agencies, but only ones that are going to be potentially happening going forward.
Yeah, this isn't the first time you and I have spoke or you've been on this show talking about this stuff. How do these new rules fit into the broad scope of what the Trump administration is trying to implement when it comes to changing federal personnel policy?
This is only one slice of a much larger picture that OPM is looking at here in terms of reshaping the firing, removal, workforce rules for federal employees. They've also recently implemented schedule policy/career, so removing a lot of longstanding civil service protections for some employees. There have also been major changes to how the federal probationary period works, where agencies can now remove a probationary employee for more reasons than in the past. And, one that really ties back to what we've been discussing today, Eric, is the changes that OPM has just finalized to the performance management system for federal employees. Now agencies are going to use a forced distribution system, which means that they're going to be limiting how many federal employees can be rated as a level 4 or 5 on the performance scale. And that's important when considering in the context of the RIF changes that they're making, where performance is going to be the top priority. So there's a lot of questions coming up about, will things be more subjective when agencies are conducting a RIF and, looking at employees' performance and that being the top consideration rather than tenure or seniority. And again, Jenny Mattingly from the Partnership for Public Service talks about some of the concerns or questions that she still has about what this is going to really look like.
How you determine then who your top performers are for a RIF. If everybody's a 3, how do you do that? Does that mean agencies can just say, we're just going to send all those people out the door? I mean, these are the questions in implementation. And then if the guidance to do RIFs comes from OPM or in conjunction with PLACE, and people want to question their performance as being used as a reason to RIF them or not, the appeals process is brought right back into OPM. So you have to look at the big picture of how all of these rules actually tie together.
And again, that's Jenny Mattingly, Vice President of Public Policy and Stakeholder Engagement at the Partnership for Public Service.
And that is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Of course. And you can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.